Hi,
Hey, good to see you.
good to see you. I have you on my screen like you're down and I'm up. Are you seeing like I don't know how to make side to side. Do you know how to?
In the you on mine anyway, in the top right corner, there's something called view.
Yeah,
It gives you some options. I think gallery is the side by side option.
yeah, that's what I have, but I have you below me. But anyway,
Oh.
let's see how that. It's yeah, it's good to see you. Ah, I have this thing that I don't want to um do anymore, and I don't know how to delete. Can you see this? Can you see something else in your screen now?
Yes, something about read.ai meeting notes.
Oh yeah. Okay, I signed up. You know how Zoom now has all these options, all these apps?
Yep.
Oh my God. I just like it does my head in. I don't even know what they do. And I just signed up for one of them, and that's one of them. And I just want to get it out. But I so I'll remove that one. Let's see. Okay, it went. Yeah, so I asked you if I could record straight away because and then we can choose what goes. I think because one thing that I often find hard is this transition between I'm here with you and saying truly hi and then saying hi again. And I'm like, that never feels really smooth. So I wanted to.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of different ways to do it. For me, I often have a little da 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 thing at the beginning where I summarize a person. So then after that, saying hi again is kind of like a refreshing surprise.
Oh, that's
But
good.
actually, my favorite podcasts are when it sounds like they're just in the middle of a conversation right when you start.
Yeah,
Super
yeah.
casual.
Often when I see Jordan Hall's channel, it's often like this. Like he doesn't introduce most people, and I'm like, oh, I'm catching up as I go. But I appreciate it. I want to introduce you, but I wanted to introduce you more like through my lenses and why I reached out to a few people to start this conversation with me because what I'm gonna what I'm trying to do with Fine Line Full Circle, which is like the beginning of this project that I mentioned to you, is that I'm gonna start like the way I'm thinking about it, it's like abstract painting that at the end, hopefully it will make sense. But in the beginning, it will just be like a stroke
Right.
here and a stroke here. And I'm hoping to get variety and tackle things from the cycles to the systems to the play to the edgy and difficult and give enough texture to the topic of the masculine and feminine that fills the canvas and hopefully at some point it allows us um, more clarity and nuance of like, okay, so there is the animus and anima, or there's yin and yang, or there's men and women, or whatever we're talking about, and all of it together. But the reason I invited you, and I'm actually initiating, you're like the first stroke of the canvas. uh let's see what you put in the canvas, or what we put in the canvas. I think that mostly because I was reflecting on this, and I really trust you. Like I don't know you well, but I trust you because of the way you show up. I see you showing up. I trust your mind, which makes me relaxed because I believe I can go into difficult or tricky terrains and have humor and bring humor and fun and playfulness, because I think these two things are important. And um and you just have like, I think you have a brilliant way of linking things together and making things more visible to people that are listening to you. And I think that that's really important as well, is making things visible from different. So I'll be coming to through one, one angle, and then as you explore together and you go like, I don't know, like that sounds whatever you say, I think things will be more clear, hopefully, to other people. And I just and I thought you would be a fun playmate to start the conversation with.
Well, I hope that's all true. It sounds good.
Is there anything else that you want to say, like more curriculum like, or whatever it is that you feel that might allow people that, because I'm hoping that this conversation starts also trickling outside of the liminal web. That's one of the points for me, is really bridging communities. And the reason why I'm bringing menstrual cycle conversations into the integral space and all these different things is that I really want these dialogues to meet. So that means that a lot of people might not know who you are or what you do, and all the reasons that I just said, that I trust you and I want you to have you here. So maybe if you share a little bit of why, like what you're doing in the moment, what you care about. And
I am hosting the Integral Stage podcast, and the reason I'm doing that is because I think it's really important to like conversationally map a very broad spectrum of people who are all engaged in depth-oriented or transformational work of some kind. There's a lot of these overlapping communities, and there need to be a lot of bridge people to be able to understand the ideas and to be able to get along with the personalities and the different moods that are in different like tribes in this community. So I'm doing a lot of that. I'm preparing to give a talk on integral shamanism and the meta crisis for San Diego Integral. I'm preparing to give a talk on metamar and spirituality for Greg Henrique's Utah Consilience Conference. I'm doing a course online with Parallax in Europe in April about masculine and feminine technology and the creation of the sacred. I'll be leading the Metamar and Spirituality Retreat, the third one in Vermont in May. Substack, that takes a lot of effort. I'm running the Emerge website. So I'm sort of in a lot of different overlapping communities, metamodernism, integral, game B, sort of whatever those all have in common, trying to bring coordination and spirit and liveliness to it with as broad a range of appreciations as possible.
That's beautiful.
And then in my own time, I'm mostly focused on spiritual practice.
And actually, I'd love to hear more about like, your definition, or what you mean by spiritual practice, or how does it like show up in your world. I don't know if you want to go into that now, or we can just no.
I mean,
it doesn't matter.
It's up to you. You're steering this one.
I'm steering this one. That's a very interesting place to be in. It's interesting. I'm experiencing. Is it okay if we do a check-in first? I'm just noticing.
Sure.
Yeah. I'll just start with a check-in, because to me, what I noticed, and I even had a conversation for Tim Adeline's podcast in Australia with Guy Sense, talk about showing up in conversation. And what came up for me through that conversation is that just checking in with the personal a little bit eases me into just abstract. Or so I was just I was quite nervous before coming to this conversation, which I'm even having a hard time framing it as nervous, because it's mostly like a sensation in my body, in my heart, which comes online in very exciting times too. So it's not really like I don't trust it as risk, but it's an interesting thing to be with, because it scrambles my brain. So everything, it's suddenly I forgot everything about you, and I watched some podcasts, I prepared, and then I was like, forgot everything. I don't know. So what, and And I think what that does, it actually puts me in a very good place for this conversation, because it's what I want to bring in, is that type of contribution and the relevance to contribute from that place. But also it feels scary and risky to the narrative, like to how I see people showing up. Like when I see people showing up, usually I don't tend to see a lot of the mess. Like maybe it's edited from videos, or, you know, in the workplace, you know, emotions are out or whatever. So the way that I was raised and has shaped me has compartmentalized things. And even though I know them not to be true, it shows up, and it's still, you know, it's still here. And I think that making this process visible, I think now doing the check-in with you, but also to whoever listens, feels relaxing to me, because then it feels important to me that yeah, it's not abstracted from, like, this conversation is not abstracted from where I came from, and, you know, my dispositional state as I sat here, and yeah, all of that feels important. So I'm relaxing as I speak, so that's good.
Yeah. I mean, it's different, I think, with different guests and in different contexts, but I think we can be um, just very much in the moment and see where the conversation goes. I'm happy to discuss any topic, but I'd like it to be to like iterate on itself, to fold itself in and flow and unfold. The check-ins are very interesting because on the one hand, they risk the indulgence of going into the narrative of who we are and eating up a lot of space, but on the other hand, it's super important to ground our excitements and also to get over that little feeling of difference. Like I'm having my experiences in me, but when I can say them, then I put them in the shared space, and my internal experience doesn't have to feel at risk of being separate from the event. So let's be inside the event, I say.
No, that's yeah, that sounds good. I like that. And that's your check-in? Oh, just checking.
Yeah, well, that's what came up for me while you were doing your check-in. My check-in is this is my last call of the day, so I'm happy about that. I feel gently upwardly delighted and cheerful. I have this sort of, I want to say, problem lately, which is um, there's a kind of quality that surrounds me sometimes. And now when I check on myself, it shows up very prominently. It can even be distracting. If I'm not paying attention to it, I can just be me. But when I'm asked to check on myself, then very often there's this thing there. And it's so delightful and interesting to me that I might space right out or something like that.
Oh, can you speak a little bit more about that? Like this thing. What's this thing?
um, it's in the integral sense of talking about first, second, and third person lenses. So I can, it's like it's me, and it's like it's some entity, and it's like it's some thing. Uh, Very often I say it's a little bit like a sphere or a torus. It's transparent and shiny and delightful and extremely encouraging. Like it's sort of uh, just a deep sense of okayness. It's very charming, but also a little bit suspicious. Sometimes I feel that I don't want to just go down the road of saying it's wonderful and making it sound like it's this great spiritual thing, because I want to hold open the space of not knowing what it is. So sometimes I play thinking maybe it's a parasite, maybe it's some strange thing that wants to take me over, and it's just convincing me that it feels good. I don't know, but it does feel very good.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was nice to yeah, just try to imagine what you're sharing. And I think what's coming up for me now is like so there are two things, like when you were talking about the check-in and being in the experience. So I like what I wanted really to try to do, and of course I'm sure I'm gonna mess up tremendously, but I am okay with just trying, is like see what's arising in the moment, but also trying to envision, because there was something that we spoke and you asked me in my conversation with you for the integral stage that really prompted, I mean, I didn't have an answer, which was when I was bringing in the notion of the importance of menstrual cycle awareness. And maybe to just frame this, I don't want and don't need the conversation to just be there, but just to frame where I'm coming from. It's like, so where I'm coming from is that the cycle and the state shifts it provides are inherent, are in the body. And so I don't need to become more embodied if I just, I mean, I have to in some ways, because we have become more abstract, even women, so much so that we don't notice, a lot of us don't notice our cycles. But once we actually just have words for it, that can be just a prompt that we need to start going like, oh. And then if you start almost like a beginner's, like you talk a lot about some skills that you develop in spirituality, and that's a skill. So you develop the skill of like tracking your cycle, for example. And then you start noticing patterns. And of course, like when some people ask me, well, but you know, because I say it matches the archetypes of the seasons, and then people go, well, but you know, I'm happy and I'm premenstrual, and I'm like, well, but winter has sunny days, you know. So but I'm trying to just find the pattern first, because if we deconstruct the pattern before we see it's a pattern, and I think that that's the problem, we deconstructed the pattern before we saw there was a pattern, and then later when we inhabit the pattern we can go like, you know, of course there are exceptions, and of course. So the point that it's important to me is that in bringing this cycle awareness, and as more and more of us, like men and women, start, like it's almost like there is this, like what I imagine is like when women with their cycles walk, you know, go to work or talk to people, what we're experienced as this flat version of a drawing, and there was a forgetfulness of the full, like the drawing of a house. It's actually not the house. And I think, of course, that's for everybody. But in the cycles perspective, it's like what it holds. It's a vision for reality, that in which grief, in which deconstruction, in which all of that is embodied. It's in the makeup of the physicality of a woman. So then being like when somebody is in a meeting room, for example, with a lot of women, if they held that each of these women at that time would be holding an archetype of the cycle, like what a few of them would be in death, a few of them would be in grief, a few of them would be in building and construction. So spring and summer, all these different stages of the menstrual cycle, I think what it affords is just a stretch in like what's possible, like what's possible in terms of creativity. And so I'm saying all of that to say that when you asked me, so I'm simultaneously speaking to the fear of, you know, I usually don't talk about this stuff, so it's very new to talk. I mean, I've been talking recently, but it's not that I grew up talking about it, you know. So I still have the little voice going like, ah, you're talking about the menstrual cycle with Layman, you know, like it's like, what are you doing? Like there's that. And so that's like the past in me that hasn't found validation. And simultaneously, when you ask me like, what could the world look like if we all played like that? And I said, I don't know, because we don't. So simultaneously, I was like, wanted to see if we could play, like, what would happen if you kind of like afforded me, you know, as you look at me and as I'm with you, like I'm affording you what you bring, and you see these archetypal places in me. And then I tell you now, I'm in the phase of autumn and deconstruction, for example. I am, so it's much less really cognitively accurate, but very really going more into the void, going to the depth, and like entering, it's like experientially it could feel like grief, you know, like it has, that's like very close to the skin in that phase. And then when Bonita Roy talks about the dispositional states, you know, that it affords, and so and then the affect stream and all that kind of stuff, like if I'm tracking that through the lens of the menstrual cycle, my dispositional state is changing, and then what's possible for me with you today is different than if we were meeting in my summer phase. And how would that be included in a religion that's not a religion, or meta-modern spirituality, or yeah, or maybe just what's showing up for you as I share like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. For me, it's because the cycles for me as a man aren't so overt in my body, right? I go through phases of the day, and there's a sort of male sexual cycle, but it's subtler. It's not as overt. So what I see is what's very obvious to me are these sort of larger cyclic patterns around me. Like I feel like I'm confronting the spring everywhere I go. So then I feel like I'm in the spring. And when, we're trying to do the metamodern spirituality retreats approximately every 6 months. But I don't think we've done enough of them to see how the spring ones feel compared to the autumn ones yet. But that's
Mm-hmm.
something I'm looking forward to seeing.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to sort of presence the fact that from my perspective, from the male perspective, perhaps like I can see very easily how I might think about how the structures of the religion that isn't a religion unfold in terms of these cycles I can look at outside myself. It's a
Mm-hmm.
little trickier to think how they show up in terms of the cycles within a person.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
um, activities need to be very fluid. There's a certain kind of, let's say you gather for a retreat or an event, you're going to try to do something that brings the sacred forth as a collaborative invention with
Mm-hmm.
hopefully a flexible, balanced mentality around it. Um, you need enough structure that people have something to coordinate around. There has to be somebody has to ring that meditation bell and go, this is generally, we're going to talk about this and do this exercise. But there has to be a really open shared experience that not everybody has to come to every exercise. You
Mm-hmm.
might be in a different mood, and there's a variety of different spaces
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
go into, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a person wants to be in the kitchen. Maybe a person wants to be in the woods. Maybe a person wants to be sitting in meditation,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's not just what they want to be, because everybody needs to be challenged to some
Mm-hmm.
degree. But
Mm-hmm.
to have a multiple niches and
Mm-hmm.
multiple styles of events,
Mm-hmm.
and just this sensibility that has to be embodied by whoever is symbolically at the front of the room,
Mm-hmm.
has to make it seem like you're not this is not your job to show up the same way everybody else is showing up. It's
Mm-hmm.
your job to
Mm-hmm.
follow that flow and go in and out of those states and communicate those with people to the best of your ability. That's actually something that really stands out for me, is there's an insufficiency of communication. And
Mm-hmm.
this partly has to do with different kinds of types, male and female types, but
Mm-hmm.
also I'm seeing it really in the spiritual domain,
Mm-hmm.
which is how do we get a spirituality that's not just flat, but isn't hierarchical either?
Mm-hmm.
How do we get a spontaneous kind of verticality and horizontal thing at the same time?
Mm-hmm.
And I think for us collaboratively to work that out together, there's a lot of things we need to know about each other that we don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily know. We'll talk about their projects, but they don't say, here's my subtle experience. Here's what it's like to be me as a being,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that other people can hear that from each other. We can kind of get a subconscious sense of how to position each other. I think that
Mm-hmm.
really focusing on a subtler level of communication is essential.
I agree with you. And it's fascinating because I think the only reason why I actually even decided to put to create this project is because I started having, I mean, when I woke up, I'll just say from my perspective of the menstrual cycle, which is a subtle experience, but I mean, there's many, but let's just go into that one. It was fascinating to me to be in a circle and be in a circle when I was, initiated into that and learned a different frame, a healthier frame. And the healthier frame all of a sudden was like, oh my God. And then when I heard many women, and over the years, many women going like, oh my God, I feel robbed of my experience. I feel robbed because I didn't have the frame, and I feel robbed. So then I was like, oh, it's not just me. Okay. How does it feel to you to feel robbed? What is that? And then checking in with many, and then with many people, but then leaving those contexts and going to talk to people that have never been initiated. I mean, they have their cycles, but they haven't been initiated into the new frame, and going like, how is your cycle for you? Oh, it's nothing, I don't care. And it's like, and what if I tell you about this? And all of a sudden they go like, oh, that does make sense. And then if I start unpicking, I see, for example, one thing that was really interesting for me, and it was tricky to even explore with my partner. I was like, how do you experience courage? Tell me about what's courage for you? Because when people say, because when I see, for example, women tell me that it's really hard for them to broadcast or to come out, like do this stuff. And then I can see it's more male, like in the spaces that I've been, it seems much more casual for men. So I'm just, so, but then when I explore fear, so I say to my partner, like, do you have fear of that? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, but how, like, you still do it? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, tell me more. So then I understand, because in my body, and then I talk to a lot of women friends. I don't think it's only a man-women thing, but it does seem to show up. It's like this quickness. So that's the fine line of full circle. This seems to be quick. It's like, I'm afraid and I go, and I it can be testosterone or also the hunter archetype of like, I'm afraid of the bull or whatever, but I still have to go and hunt the lion. I'm gonna lean towards the fear and just go. Whereas the woman in that same place should be like aware and relationally awake to the danger and attuning to the babies and the kids and protecting in a different way. So the way it's showing up, and I see, is that for example, in these women's spaces I go, we talk a lot about our experience, but a lot of the husbands don't know. Like, they don't know the details of women's business, or the outer world doesn't know. So it's just really kept in here, and because this is a fear that's too hard. Whereas I experience men being much more, not courageous, not the right word, but just really quick in the outer. But then when I say to some men, let's check in, what's going on in your house? What's going on in your relationship, in your sexuality? Then the woman might be really quick to share because she shares that so openly with her friends. But for a man, it might be like, oh, that's private. So I'm wondering, I'm wondering, this bridge that you're saying, I think it's really important, because I even see in the conversation between genders, like trans women and women or trans men, that when we voice things, if I don't actually take the time to go like, tell me what you mean by that, and I just take the word, we might make the mistake that we're coming from the same place, but actually we need to really refine to go like, oh, that's what you mean by the feminine. Like, when you want it to become, that's what you're meaning. And undo the projections, which I think cause a lot of just misunderstanding, really.
Two things came up for me there. One was that we need to be aware of a higher or deeper standard for dialogue, right? That some people are happy just to say whatever's on their mind in the areas where they feel they have expertise or where they can get to quickly.
Mm,
Other people like to probe for things in various ways, but I think if we had a sort of a shared agreement and understanding that there was a place for conversation to get to, right? There
mm,
was a success in dialogue, which is that we have an emotional shift. Now we feel a resonance. We feel that we understand. We see a new structure as if
mm,
from two different sides
mm,
together. If we think, oh, we haven't really communicated until we've got to that place,
mm,
and we don't always have time to get there.
mm,
But I think that could be the standard we could set.
mm,
And then we can know, oh, maybe I've said a bunch of things, but we haven't really communicated or something like that.
mhm,
So maybe someone's not saying enough, maybe someone else is saying too much, whatever it is. If we knew what, and this is a very masculine phrasing, if we knew what the target was,
mm,
it would be
mm, mm,
easier to hit the target.
mm,
So that's one thing. The other is,
mm,
the last retreat I ran, one of the things we did was play with subgroups, like because there's a kind of a renewed tribal sensibility to a lot of this, and in tribal life, there are these um, roles, these structures, these types of people within the tribe, right? So at one point, I'm going to get down from whatever little cushion I'm on at the front of the room and say, let's have the women talk. And you're going to be the women when you go on
mm,
stage. Now
mm,
we're all going to talk to you.
mm,
But then you're going to come back down. You don't have to be the women when you come back down. And then we're going to let's have
mm,
the four oldest people go up there and they're going to
mhm,
be the elders right now, but they're not
mhm,
trapped in that role. We're not saying you're
mhm.
the elders. You're
Yep.
going to play that and come back because we don't know. We can't prejudge and go, all
Mm,
right, the new spirituality is going to handle women like this, and it's going to
mhm,
handle them like this when they're in their autumn phase.
mhm,
Right? We can't judge that in advance. We
mhm.
have to have it emerge.
Yep.
So we have to be able to play with those typologies in a way that's comfortable and nobody feels like they're getting trapped in an identity, but they feel
Mhm.
empowered to explore the identity to the point where it produces information that we can all use to coordinate a form of kind of new tribal sacredness.
Mm. No, I love that. And the couple of things. I'm not sure if I'm gonna remember both things, but one thing was like that'll be really fun to play with is there's this saying in religion, like for example, in very strict um Judaism or in temples in Bali that a menstruating woman's not welcome, right? And maybe I have shared that, I don't remember exactly with you before, but in my experience, that makes total sense because the energy of the church or the temple is an ascending energy that's aiming to ascend. The woman menstruating is descending. So, from a perspective that's not like culture wars or like a patriarchal frame, if it's just energetic, this is not helpful for what we're trying to do over here. But you're welcome and you're revered, just not here at this moment, for example. Then an opposite church in which like a woman menstruating, for example, in which she sits or they sit in the front of a room and actually try to cohere the energy into that descent, bringing people into the experience. I mean, that would be a fun play, like to the experience of winter in their bodies. And of course, that would be experienced differently by different people, but it's, you know, winter is different than summer. So there is an experience of it that I believe is could be felt in a group. And I feel that the modernity, I mean, our quick paced, just everything that we have taught ourselves to do in modernity, we just can't drop in. We don't have the time and the space to drop into these energies and the wisdom, the slowness that it invites in. That's one thing that you're I think that's one thing when you're talking about how the your retreats would go, and then something else came up but I forgot, so just yeah.
Yeah, what I was and connecting back to what I was saying, it would be really interesting if you had enough women at an event like that that you could bring forward people who are at different points in a cycle
Mm,
and have them say what it's like, and have them sort of speak in that dialect at that time.
mm,
And it might turn out, if you had 4 or 5 of them who were in their winter mode, that one of them might be sort of really empowered
mm,
especially empowered in their winter mode. You go, okay,
mm,
well, maybe she's
mm,
the winter priestess, and maybe
mm,
another one's specially empowered in the spring mode or something
mm,
like that. These are things variations we wouldn't be able to see unless we were able to get enough of them together and hear them properly to start to see what they have in common and also what the differences are, and then
mhm,
see if the field we're trying to generate together
mm,
as a kind of collaborative spiritual practice
mm.
um, wants to take form around some of those differences.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that'll be fun. And I think, yeah, insightful. And what comes to me now, I'm kind of like noticing that I'm shifting gears into the what could be, which is like feels so exciting and relaxing to me. And simultaneously, like I was hearing to some conversations you had before, and you had one with Greg Enriquez in which you were talking about self-esteem and value, and then you talked about I mean, maybe I'll just stay with that one, because I think that in the conversations that I heard you having, like I saw you bringing like grief and the broken heart, and I mean these are super teachings of the cycle. They are like you die to yourself every month. You experience micro deaths, so you kind of like develop the capacity to hold your tribe, to hold your people, and but we haven't been practicing as women, so um and that's a loss. I think it's a loss for humanity, not just for women. But the bit that is before the bit of creativity, and when we're dreaming this creative space, the bit before is like self-esteem and value. It's like if you don't have these generative frames of the cycle, what happens is that most women experience contraction, a contracted state, a lot of the time, in which they're not matching society, like whatever expectations, and they don't match it a lot of the time. Like I'd say, like for many women that I know, like half their cycle, or there a lot of the time they're just making a crazy effort to match. So even in a body sense, to be able to inhabit a place in which, like, I wonder what would happen, like almost the healing, if a bunch of women could be with a bunch of men and just go like, wow, like this is the whole of me, and it's valid and it has value, and I'm claiming it. Like, see me for this, don't see me just for the jolly little pretty little girl, whatever, that I try to fit myself in for, oh my god, there's ding 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 in my computer and I don't even know how to switch off. It's okay, we'll go with the ding. I'll pretend it's a meditation little singing bowl. I notice that emotion arises for me as I say these words, because it's like holding the humor and the pain like simultaneously, because it's like it's serious stuff to me. Like it's serious because it's like I do feel that we've been robbed of this experience of reality as women, but as societies. Like, how would it be like to, like, even this conversation with you, this feels so good to me. Like I don't feel ashamed that I'm tearing up in front of you. But if I was in a board meeting and if this side of me hadn't been like welcomed in, I would be contracting my tears so hard right now, and I'd be trying so hard to be intelligible and coherent and not let some side show, because I would be put in a box of like less equipped or something, and then I wouldn't be promoted, and then I wouldn't be able to feed my children, and it's just so confining. And so I see it as serious, like it is serious. And like I wonder I'm like, how? Like, how can this yeah, I don't even know what I'm asking. I'm just going like, how can we afford each other more of that visit? Like, how can we start seeing each other more fully, and even in the context of like so much creativity in which I see the liminal web or integral and game being places of creativity. I don't see that part of it showing up. So to me, it's still partial, and I go, wow, how do we learn? Like, how do I say all that and not make you awkward? Because I don't want to make you awkward, but I'm like, oh, like it might be a byproduct because we don't know how to do this. So then whatever, like, yeah.
Yeah, we certainly can't leap to a perfect version where it makes nobody awkward, right? And also there's not just the awkwardness of communicating from different chemical states and different points in cycles. There's pain that's associated with the way we hold these things, and there's energy of challenge that can come through. So there is room for it to be sort of endlessly disturbing in some respect, but there's also a lot of room to make it a lot less disturbing. And so I think that's one of the really interesting questions is what are the necessary supportive conditions
Mm,
for women to be able to communicate the value of the
mm,
different places and cycles that they are in a way that comes across as graceful and interesting and
mm,
not upsetting and off-putting.
mm-hmm,
And so one of those conditions is physiological health, right? And your basic mental balances and your hydration and relaxation and nourishment, all those things make a big difference in whether it shows up gracefully. But another equally important piece is having the idea that it's okay. Like just the idea that crying is good is
mm,
already an invitation different than what we normally hear in the modern system.
mm,
Having interactions with people that help us learn that,
mm,
and the desire to practice communication that's more accurate, more
mm,
complete, but
mm,
also doesn't burden the other person with the
mm,
fact that you are in a point in a cycle.
mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating because that makes total sense to me. And when I see how it plays out, even like the name PMS and the jokes around it and stuff, it's like what you see when like contracted people with a not very great dispositional state, with not a lot of capacity, with less accommodating hormones in their body, um, goes and hasn't found the ways to gracefully understand boundaries throughout the cycles and go like negotiate them, and then estrogen makes it easy to accommodate beyond. So I mean, it's the point really in a way to hold babies and have to wake up in the middle of the night and the whole thing. But then there's a whole learning thing, and I agree with you, because what we see is like, I see the names that we give in society is the name of the off-putting energy. It's almost like a reaction. So the women are reacting to something, they're like, I don't feel seen, and then they scream for like a week or something. And then man is like, I don't want to hear you this time. And then it becomes this kind of, yeah, it becomes this, I think mostly what it becomes is this caricature of like empty nutrients of what the archetype is. It's like it's so full and rich and multi-layered and nuanced and yummy and delicious for both to play in, and it would enhance the insights of and the drives of men and vice versa. Like it would, because I mean, I have this beautiful example. There's a friend of mine, and we've become really good friends, and we play in this masculine feminine thing quite a lot. Like, I learned a lot how men work through here. Like, he'd be like, no way, this is not, he'd tell me, which would be really good. But sometimes he'd say to me, just stop me. Like, when I have an arousal to do something, I'll go and do it. Just stop me, because it burns. Like, sometimes it just backfires because it goes too quickly and people don't understand where he's coming at. And when he said that, he said, I need a woman, I need a co-facilitator, somebody to stop me. Like, my drive is too quick. And there was an aha moment for me in that request, because I was like, oh my God, actually, what if patriarchy is not, I mean, of course, I don't like the name, whatever, but what it stands for, it's like a seeing, a favoring of a way of being. But it kind of like, we have collapsed, and like, men created that. And I was like, well, of course, men can't create that by themselves. So it's like, if there's this arousal completion that's quicker from a testosterone filled body, and if the cyclical rhythm of women that is constantly undoing itself and slowing, if they are not slowing that down, if they're not helping the homeostasis of the whole thing, that they're playing a part. Like, we're all playing a part in this being too quick. So when my friend asked me, like, stop me, I was like, oh, you're giving me permission. And somehow, maybe the outspoken, the like, going back to confidence, what it looks like from over here, like, is that a lot of men in these spaces or in the outer world are confident. I don't see the lack of confidence, because when it shows up in the world, it shows piercing. So I can't stop that. Like, it's an interesting learning how to dance with that energy and going like, oh, it's okay for me. Actually, it's required of me. That's my role to play, to go like, hold on, why are you doing that again, darling? That's beautiful, but why? Progress is good, but why again? Hold on, why are we doing, like, all of that? I think we have doubted our place so much, and then the circle within a woman can become so neurotic. Like, the pathology of it turns in itself, instead of turning into cycling other things and cycling the family and the community. It cycles itself. So, oh, I'm not worthy, I'm not doing it. So then it doesn't play with, it shuts itself off, which I think in tribal spaces it wouldn't have happened, because then everybody's placed in a shared value in that small tribe. But now in larger tribes, larger contexts, it's become diluted. And I think I went many places, and I don't know.
Well, one of the things I sort of saw when you were speaking was the need for a certain complementarity between the masculine and the feminine, where I don't know if I told you this when we spoke last time, but I um, I used to live in this house where there were some men and some women, and we would do a poetry night. And
No, you didn't tell me.
almost without exception, before they started, the women would go, "Well, I don't know if this is a poem, but I'm going to read it anyway." And I realized by talking to the men, they all had the same experience. They didn't know if they'd written a poem or not, but the way they said that was, "Here's a poem I wrote."
Yep.
But it meant the same thing, right?
Yeah.
The same spectrum of confidence and doubt was present. So, in the same way that that fellow can ask you to say, sort of check the simplicity of his initial, of what you think is his confidence, the masculine can then also try to add confidence to what might initially appear to be a lack of confidence, right? That there's a lot of sort of the self-reflective neuroticism in the female cycle. I'm not maybe they're right, maybe this is a disturbance of some kind. but the right kind of male feedback to say, no, that's actually a thing you should be confident about. There's a
mm,
power, there's wisdom, there's a value there. That
mm,
seems like a reciprocal to that masculine request to say, please give me some doubt where you
mm,
think I might be confident because maybe I'm not.
mm, mm-hmm.
So there's a number of different ways for them to be complementary, but they have to co-evoke each other somehow at a richer level than we've been doing in modern civilization.
No, yes, I agree with you. And I think that that's why, in some ways, um, your question that you asked in um in our first conversation is actually what's sourcing this project is it has to be sourced from openness. Like I can't source it from trauma and all the bits that we haven't met each other and the anger and frustration, because otherwise that doesn't allow for creativity to flow. It's just, I just can spend hours just going like, you don't see me for this, and you can, like this, and then this. But actually, in trying to answer the question that you asked, in going like, what could it be? Let's play with it. Let's prototype it and fail a bit and play with the failing. I think that there are more chances of finding out, because I do see a lot of this. Of course, I'm in a relationship, and so I see in my partner where the lack of confidence is, but actually I have to explore with him, because, for example, in my house, he goes and fixes everything, right? He just goes and finds out, like he goes and like the pipe, whatever. And then I just thought he knew. I thought he knew. I was like, fuck, the guy like just knows everything. Like, and then I was like, do you know that? He's like, no. And I was like, okay. And so I could have just gone and go like, I'll try to fix the pipe, like, and Google it. He's like, yeah. And I was like, oh, so you're okay just making mistake. And like if you make a hole in the pipe, then you just deal with that. He's like, yeah. And I was like, oh, like, because there was some statistics that this, I've been conversations with some women, and I don't even know where this research is, but apparently other people near related to it. So I was like, okay, so it seems to be a thing that like women need to be like 85 or 70%, 75% sure before they speak, whereas men need to be 25% sure. And I'm like, well, that's fascinating, because it would match the belief, like patriarchy is not, it's not even a thing, like it's not even the true inherent experience. It's like us believing, like me believing that I have to be 85% sure that that's the collective agreement, whereas you have a different collective or other people are playing by different collective agreement, and therefore we don't talk about the agreement, so we don't know, so it's not collective, so we're just in default. And then when the systems are created by whatever, the impulse, arousal, completion, the impulse, then we don't feel met, like a bunch of women or more feminine people that operate in the other way of being. They go like, oh, but it doesn't allow for me. And I'm like, well, but we haven't gone there to create it, because we had to be 85% sure, and we're never sure because we cycle on ourselves. So it's like, yeah, anyway, making all that visible, I think it's like, it's supportive to again the deconstruction of like, maybe that's where I'm missing you. That's yeah.
I'm thinking about this from a classically integral point of view in terms of what they call the four quadrants,
Mm,
right? So there are these different dimensions that you want to take into account in any given situation. And one of those dimensions is systemic, right? What kind of system are we operating inside, right? There's some kind of, whether we're talking about patriarchy or modernity, some system has been set up and it advantages certain things and disadvantages certain other things. So that's a reality. And then there's what's going on in our body. How do we feel? How healthy are we? Right? What's just physically the
mm,
case? And then there's something about what's going on in our psychology, right? And where's our identification? Where's our trust? What type of subjectivity do we operate from? And there's no one of these that's
Mm,
like the source of all the other ones.
mm-hmm,
They all need
mm-hmm,
to be taken into account. They're all sort
mm-hmm,
of co-primary. So yes, there's a lot of structural stuff that keeps people from living a more full and rich life, but there's also a lot of stuff inside an individual,
mm,
and that's often, from the spiritual point of view, that's a key area because you can directly start to affect that one. You
mm,
might not be able to. Might take 1,000 years to undo modernity or the patriarchy,
mm,
but you
mm,
could go to work right now seeing if there's something you're doing
mm-hmm,
that's holding it back from you showing up more completely.
mm-hmm. No, I agree with that 100%. And I think that I'm wondering, hold on, I'm not even sure if that's right. Let me think. I'm wondering also if that's a polarity in the, for example, if a male drive that's more like this, like, and then a female drive that's more like this, if for her stretch is to go out, like, so for example, for me, it's really like it's working on my psyche to create this podcast because it's so counter, like it's like, and but because working on me and my cycle and healing this, I've done it for like 15 years, but then the mismatch is like I still notice contraction when I go and offer anything, in that I don't want to frame the menstrual cycle. Like if I want to do anything and not frame it, I'm setting up for failure, because either I perform and then I can enter into performance, which feels really less interesting to me. I don't want to show up like that. I'd fail. I wouldn't be good. But also I don't want to do it. Like I want to support us to like show up more fully as us. So then I see myself in this place in which anything I need to do, I want to do in the world, I need to frame the menstrual cycle, because if I'm not going to perform as people that hired me expect, like this, if I'm going to undo that, then I'm going to have to say, hi, like I'm going to have to pre-frame what's happening here. So I think like I'm working on the systemic place, because I'm going, and I don't know if when we spoke, I had already gone to the rites of passage with my girl. Had I done that? Did I talk to you about it?
You did mention it, but I'm not sure if you were about to or had already.
Because we've done it. So I see, how young, healthy 12, 13-year-olds start to get formed in a, like when we undo, like the woman and the moms and dads are working on themselves. And so I can see that. But then outside, I still don't see it. I don't see the school system. I don't see the workforce. So then I'm working on another quadrant, because I'm like, it, it it needs to, like you're saying, it needs to they need to support each other and dance each other. Otherwise, it's still stifling to be all healed, like not completely all healed. And then um imagine having a prime minister or something that says, that's fully in her like wisdom of her menopause and stuff. Like people would freak out. People would be like, oh my god, that woman's crazy, like she's talking about, like it's so taboo that we can't have that yet. Or so
There's some interesting things there, like the level of concern. It seems like female brains are organized to track a great many more variables. So the male brain can dispense with a lot of information and just decide it's got enough to go on.
mm,
And that means it doesn't get quite as neurotic and anxious in a lot of areas. And like you were saying, like don't you feel like you don't understand about the plumbing? You're like, yeah, that's how I feel. So even when you said that, if a woman was like that as the prime minister, people would freak out. But people freak out at the president all the time. People freak out at the male leaders constantly. People lose their minds. I mean, what was this whole Donald
mm,
Trump thing? It's
mm-hmm,
very upsetting at whoever's the leader,
mm,
right? So then you have to go, well, maybe that's okay, right? The men, so to speak, the
mm,
masculine has been acting like, yeah, that's okay if everybody freaks out. That's just
mm,
part of this crusade that we're undertaking. So there's a certain kind of opening to the messiness, like we've been talking about
Mm,
in terms of framing this discussion, that needs to be maybe a little bit more acceptable, right? That the men are, it's not like they don't notice a mess, but sometimes they're more tolerant of it in the house. Or,
mm,
my partner's, I've been watching her with the kids over the years. She's very concerned they might go out when it's cold.
mm,
Put this on, put this on, put this on. And, uh, I'm always like, well, maybe it's okay if they go out and they feel bad.
mm, 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 mm,
That kind of thing. So there's a certain kind of embracing of things that we're worried are negative and that we have to control. And
mhm.
maybe they don't have to be controlled. Maybe it's okay that they're a little bit negative. So that was
Oh,
one of the things that jumped out at me. The other
mm,
one was when you were talking about setting this podcast up, I thought that's a very interesting move, because there's a kind of way of talking about the feminine that it's something that escapes from or is outside of this masculine structure. It's the thing that's either remembered or forgotten, but it's outside of the structure.
mm,
The structure doesn't have a place for me. But then
mm,
you go, well, what if it did? Then I
mm,
would have to make a structure. Then I
mm,
would have to be that other thing. I would have to be the masculine in a way.
mm,
Like if you're correct about sort of seasonal cycles,
mm,
or what does it look like to set something up like that? What does it
mm,
look like to make a podcast on that basis, or those sorts of
mm,
things, where you become the structuring element rather than the
mm,
thing that escapes from or isn't
mm,
included in the structure?
mm. Yeah. Um, yeah, I like that. I think that I like that. I think uh mm, two different things came up. One is that I think that by dialogue, I think it's what's becoming more visible to me is that as a deeply relational being, which is like I'm wired to be, is the default of the woman's body and her cycle and the mothering phase I'm in. And like it's really weird to not care. So like as a prime minister and have everybody like that's in some ways it's almost ridiculous because then we let narcissists crazy that don't care about how people think about them, like Trump or whatever, to be a president, and then a good woman or whatever that's so worried about messing up and having everything the shit together doesn't even go for it, which is like the pain of it. But it's you said something as you were speaking. You said something that I was like, oh my god, it's like I'm inhabiting a performative contradiction. Like because you said something like maybe you women have to be okay with the mess, and I'm saying men or the world has to be okay with the mess. And I was like, oh, maybe I'm not okay with the mess. So it's not, it's like making the mess visible, maybe because it's scary, because it's like we created these like crazy separations in which like Facebook, there's a communing place. It's like people just show their performative lives, and then Instagram, you know, um, and then you have other places which just show their performative lives in work, and it's like, and then it's almost like we created this disassociation as if we are not the totality, and then um, I think that for women, the being cyclical and turning in itself is not helpful to engage in that. That's why in some ways taking the leap and going like, I'm gonna start and I don't care, it's gonna be messy and I'll go for it. And it's scary, but as I speak with you, I see my fear decreasing. Like, so I have a little bit more courage for the next one. And I have a little bit more courage for and I think that's how like this micro system is good. It's like it's like me undoing patriarchy inside of me, but I can't do it on my own. I have to do it in relationality. I have to go like, oh, do you accept me for my total being? Okay, so then I can have a little bit more courage to be my total being with other men and other larger groups of people. And then it's like, okay, and then maybe other women, and then we can start creating mini pods. I think, I don't know if that's where you're going with, but that's what came up for me. Also, just one more thing, is almost like there's this desire in me to be less, like, to use the cycles in a way that's outside of me, like to not just reflect on myself and reflect on, because that energy is there. It's really good for shadow work, like it's a perfect little inner spiritual teacher if you want to follow it. But there is a different place in the spiral of that teaching, which I think we're not very good at as women. We haven't allowed ourselves, or we haven't found our space and how to do it. And which is like, ah, Layman, is it okay if it's a bit messy? And you're like, yeah. And then I'm like, okay, let's try to figure it out. And and that's, I think, trying to do that, cycling a little bit outside of me a little bit.
It's interesting to me that there's a connection between allowing that mess, let's call it, and the death phase of a menstrual cycle, right? Because there's a way in which women's bodies have a wisdom around letting things die and letting things pass, and it can be disturbing, but they gain this capacity, especially if they're paying attention over time. But that's kind of what this is. Like uh the anxiety about maybe people are going to freak out, or the anxiety about the mess, or these sort of negative seeming qualities that one wants to kind of micromanage. Once I get them all under control, then
Mm,
I'll be able to show up in my fullness. It can't really work that way. So you have to, there's something in there that has to be allowed to die and flush out.
mm, mm. And I think it's probably really scary to, maybe we haven't, when I think of feminism and when I think of the polarity, it's almost like we haven't really been together in relationality, like in these larger conversations, that where I go like, I don't know, like I need you to help me, let's die together. Let's die together to this way of relating. It feels vulnerable, but it feels beautiful too. It's like, because in some ways when I see the narrative, and they have, they have matched the circumstance, like it was needed back then. Like I can see how force was needed, like we couldn't vote, so that we have to fight, there's the structures in people were more dense, like we couldn't speak in these ways, so it's okay, it makes sense. But now I'm like, um like I, it feels interesting to me to go, what would the conversation be? I mean, we're having it, but the conversation can be like this, like in a conversation in which, like, slowly kind of undress these layers, and then, like, because in a way it's vulnerable, but I'm like, I said that I had a conversation that hasn't been recorded with Jordan Hall a while ago, and I said to him something like, I want to play, and it's not like me, like I want this archetype, this energy to play in the creation of things like that are being created, and I want to play. And then he said, this reminds me, he said something like, this reminds me of like when boys are just playing ball and girls stay at the side of the field waiting to be invited, and the boys don't invite because the boys just go in and play. And I'm like, so maybe there's something scary about, it's almost counter the archetype that I'm used to a little bit, like you said, like to come in to say, I'm gonna come in and play, and then see what happens, and hmm.
There's a kind of a learning. I mean, it goes two ways, right? You want people to be more comfortable just coming into play, but you also want people to be more sensitive to the fact that a lot of people need to be invited to show up in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Like everybody's comfortable just showing up, but then there's other parts where it only comes out if you're invited,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like one of the things, if I'm hosting a lot of discussions, then I'm there to facilitate an inquiry into the person I'm speaking with. I have a lot of things that
Mm,
I could bring into the conversation. I'm not just going to bring them in.
mm-hmm.
It's got to seem like it's going to fit and that the other person also is curious about it. So
Mm-hmm.
everybody has dimensions that they aren't
Mm-hmm.
bringing in. So we have to get better at feeling invited, and we have to get better
Mm-hmm.
at inviting. And then there's a wisdom in
Mm,
alternating between caution and boldness,
mm,
right? Because that, I mean, that's how you grow trust. You shouldn't just show up and expose yourself completely and trust,
mm,
right? They might not be safe. So
mm.
you want to take risks that go past that boundary a little bit, but you want to alternate and be cautious and risk and cautious and risk and build up some a proof that it's safe, but it's never going to be perfectly safe. You're always going to have to jump to some degree.
Yeah. And as I hear you, I go like, oh my goodness, it's gonna be really clumsy for me because because it's such an interesting thing. Like I love, like I'm noticing. So in just what you said, I'm noticing. I'm like, so let's say in this project, I'm wanting to bring layman's view, but actually, maybe truly layman's full view in the context of the masculine and feminine, let's say, if that's the dance of the project, can only show up more fully in the dance after some things are done. So maybe it's clumsy to start with because it's like, oh, I'm gonna have to frame a few things so that we can learn how to show up in this new way together, and not just me as an interviewer asking you about you. um and that's interesting because I'm like, I really want to um like I feel it's a really hard balance to kind of like I notice in myself that I can either, like, let's say in a place in which I feel there's no space and this is never going to be accepted. It has been like I have so many contexts in which it didn't land at all, and then I'm like, so I just collapse, right? So I mean, I'm getting better at refining the language and changing and and shifting and not taking personally and bringing humor. But I would collapse into, like this is not good enough or something. Or then I can see how the flip side of that energy is like a forceful energy, which is also the stage, like it's not conducive to like generative conversations. And I can see how a lot of like the polarity ends up being in the, there's a lot of forcefulness, like and even the beauty of feminism at times, it comes with that, you know edge. And like what I aspire to is not that, and I don't aspire to be talking about the menstrual cycle all the time. And then how do I, because what I'm seeing, so for example in this particular conversation, and a few others that I'll have for this, is that I'm going like, some people have some capacities, so it's not exactly um their full, like what they're doing in the world, but their capacities will help uh, create riverbanks that make sense or shape this conversation in a way that feels useful and generative for both, but also for a larger group. And I'm curious how has been if feeling for you to be like in dialogue in this way, or yeah, if you feel, how do you feel in your balance, or in your, I don't know, how does it feel for you?
Well, it's feeling very, I mean, it feels pleasant and important, this discussion. I feel like there's a flow here that, um, you know, um, my fantasy would be, like you say, that it's sort of carving, it's carving a river between those banks, that it should make it easier to flow. That sort of, however seriously we take morphogenetic field theory, it does
Mm,
seem like you can do things that make it easier for people to do those things in the future.
mm,
And I think right, especially if working out how to talk about this stuff and working out what feeling quality indicates that it's being successful. And I think if we're both gaining intelligence about that and demonstrating it, then it makes it easier for that to occur in the future.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, mm,
Something that occurred to me a while ago in this
mm,
conversation that I didn't mention was
mm,
this idea. Um, Anybody can micromanage, but there's a way in which moms micromanage. Like they feel like they have to do everything, even if
mm,
other people volunteer to help. No, they have to do everything.
mm,
And so I was imagining a sort of, that kind of maternal ego relative to these four assistants, right?
mm,
These four seasonal phases of the cycle. Like I've got
mm,
these four helpers, but I
mm,
won't let them help. I feel
mm,
like I have to do it all rather than letting
mm,
them do the work when it's their turn. So there's
mm,
something, from a spiritual perspective, you're always interested in where the ego is deluding itself and being too controlling and things like that. But
mm,
this is an interesting version of that. If women could feel more comfortable letting go of some of the control and letting
mm,
those parts of themselves, which have their
mm,
archetypal cosmic
mm,
resonances, they're going to help me. They're going to do some of the work in this space. I don't have to do it all myself.
mm. I like that. And it probably doesn't help when you were talking about the mother archetype. It probably also doesn't help. Like when I'm teaching, for example, about the cycles, I put cycles within cycles within cycles within cycles to so people understand the mapping of the, because also of course because we lost. I saw you talk about interoception, and of course we lost. A lot of us don't feel how our bodies feel. So then they learn about the cycles. It's easier for some women to learn through outside, through the seasons, and then start going like, ah. But in mapping all of that, we put the life seasons. So, the one that matches ovulation is, so it's the summer phase, is the full moon, is the mother archetype, and it's ovulation. And so, for example, now I'm inhabiting the mother archetype in my life because it's really busy. So it's the same felt sense as summer, like constantly busy, constantly doing, trying to be on. But then in a micro cycle, I'm cycling within my mother archetype. But it's probably not helpful. I was just thinking that women that are wanting to show up, the age group of women, a lot of the women that are showing up are in that mother archetype, that it has that quality that you spoke of. Also, probably makes it even harder. But like I was just reflecting on even just inhabiting, even just like bringing a different language. Like when you say, I like that you said, the mother doesn't have to do everything. Let these other parts of you guide. That feels really beautiful. And know that these parts of you, I mean, they might cause havoc a little bit. Like you might need to, when you were like learning, like you tend to swing the pendulum too much. Like it's like, so when you give, like, some women might go like, oh, so I just need to let my anger out, or I need to, I'll just speak how I feel, like authenticity, like whatever is arising. And maybe that needs to be negotiated, maybe a pre-framing with the partner, because what I did see in a lot of women's spaces that I have been a part of, there's a lot of relationship havoc that was caused as women got empowered in their cycles, and they were like, oh my God, I'm powerful, oh my God, this is not a hindrance, it's a good thing. And then they start telling the partners, of their, which is maybe it's probably a good thing. Like it's like the Me Too equivalent of like, I'm just gonna speak to that. It feels important because I haven't, and I have been so ashamed of that side of me, and I'm proud, so I'm gonna. But then it comes, as you said, distasteful or like from the other side, because the other side's not experiencing all of that, and there is an imagination in the woman that he just has to take it. It's like, I'm empowered now. So I think that the pre-framing, like maybe like bringing the quadrants again, maybe the caring for the system that you're in, caring for the relational and the culture you're in, going like, okay, this is important. Let's hold that piece too. And I'll heal this, and this is important. So what do I need to put into place before I bleed? Or like the week before, like, I don't want to be cooking for everybody. I don't want to be great. Put new systems into place with care, and it's clumsy, but as you let these parts of you take control, almost like allow it to be clumsy, maybe pre-frame the clumsiness to start with, and then start working with the microsystems within the house. So to afford that space, as you said, hydration, nutrition, or all these.
Yeah, I think pre-framing is really essential. And then that's one of the gifts of tracking is it becomes possible to pre-frame when you've actually lived out and seen that these things that you really do have a future, that you're not just reacting to how it's going on in you right now, that it's going to go on with you differently in the future. You start to take yourself in the future seriously, and then you can set things up for yourself in the future. So that's really important. And the mutuality is really important because, and there's always going to be some mess. You're like, now I'm going to let my anger out. But that can damage a relationship. If the other person is only hearing the anger or is only hearing that you're unreliable because they don't know what's going on as you move through these changes, there has to be not just the sort of narcissistic attention on what am I going through and how do I express that, but if we care about someone, they have to know the whole time that we care about them, even though it's not going to be imperfect, it's going to be messy. And I think another piece is to be interested in feedback, right? So maybe when you go over the top a little bit when you start doing something new that you're learning about or feeling you can express for the first time. But what does it look like to learn to get better at that? A lot of that's response from the environment, response from people you trust, right? If everyone else in the family is, no, that was too much, mom. That's different than if everybody goes, actually, that was fine. Right. And you don't know. It's going to be a little bit experimental, but it only counts as an experiment if you're interested in how it landed with the others so that that can be used to help your subconscious learn to steer with more finesse going forward.
And I'm curious then, and it ties a little bit with the conversation that you had with Greg, which was good. I really appreciate it. And I had so much nuance and I forgot now. I can bring it up. But the self-esteem piece and the value piece. So for example, when you're trying to carve new value, right? So the whole Daniel Schmatzenberger thing, the whale is more valuable dead than alive. So if we're going like, well, the whale is worth more alive than dead, like we're bringing in, and then the cycle awareness is part of this, is a new carving. How do you negotiate? And that's a true question and curiosity, and maybe I'm happy to just hear what comes up for you. How do you navigate that reaction, the feedback from family and others, which is a true distaste? I mean, if you have been accommodating your whole life, like trying to placate, which there is some people that's how they deal with it. They disassociate so much that they actually placate all the time. And then at some point, usually menopause, it just backfires, it just goes completely haywire. But how do you trust feedback and remain open and curious to feedback, and simultaneously go like, actually, like, people might not really like this new version a little, because it's gonna actually mean I'm gonna say no more times. I'm gonna, like, it's not even just the push, it's just the as I others learn to navigate, it means like I'm what I'm negotiating is not placating all the time, not accommodating all the time. And that, like, kids don't like that, and maybe partners don't like that, bosses don't like, so how do you take the feedback and go like,
Well, it's tricky, and I don't think anybody is ever just placating or just not placating.
mm,
We oscillate through these things. A lot of
mm,
people who feel like I'm just always placating, they actually do a lot of things that are disruptive and distressing to other
mm,
people. They just think that they're being very placating all the time. So there's
yeah,
always a
true,
mixture going on.
true,
I think a lot of it has to do with what I would think of as basic spiritual skills, right? One is, can I remember my values as I'm going through the process?
mm,
Do I remember what I care about and how I love and what the good is? Do I have the kind of uh, mental capacity to self-regulate as I'm going through these things?
mm,
And do I have the distance from my sense of identity that I can be curious about it in myself? Right? Which is, do I think I totally know what I'm talking about and how it's going to affect
mm,
people? Well, if I start expressing myself, it's going to be
mm,
disruptive because I'm going to be saying no more often.
mm,
Are you sure?
mm,
Or do you not really know? Maybe you're going to say
mm,
yes more often. How do you
mm,
know? Right. So a
mm,
little bit of that
mhm,
metacognitive distance from the identity to go, I'm not the perfect expert on myself and the future of myself. I'm
mm,
open and I don't know how this is going to go, but
mhm,
I'm showing up in mutuality. I'm showing up with my values. I'm going to take some risks here. We all don't know how it's going to go, but let's try to, be together in supporting this, critiquing it, but making it safe enough that it's present to even be critiqued and explored.
mhm. Yeah. And I totally hear you on the placating thing, because what tends to happen is the placating happens in the follicular phase, and then you lash out in the other phase. So it's not um yeah, it's not graceful. But um I think that you're pointing to the metacognitive capacities, and I'm like, that's true for some part of the population. And the cocktail of hormones does make it in a way that if you haven't developed those skills slash capacities, it makes it harder to attune to that side. So that has me curious about, and, and maybe answering my own questions. Like, maybe that's why this is like a sandpit. It's like a little sandpit of exploration where it's safe, and we can have maybe those capacities more or less and work with it, so that like a larger group can benefit from the riverbank. Because for example, when the riverbank is when the river is flowing, and more women don't feel like they need to explain themselves, then they're less contracted on themselves. Then they don't need to even know so much about the menstrual cycle, talk about it, so maybe yeah, maybe.
Yeah, the metacognitive part is interesting because it requires a great deal of a person, right? It's historically only been associated with a certain subset, an esoteric subset of the population has been able to devote their time to it. But there are a lot of human problems that require metacognitive solutions. So
Mm-hmm.
one piece of this is we have to create a civilization that makes it easier for the basic practices that allow those capacities to evolve in people to evolve in people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's never going to be everybody, but there's a certain kind of, I was thinking when you were saying that about men who have anger,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's very common. They go into these modes,
Mm-hmm.
and it's hard to understand from the outside, and it's not without value, right? There's a
Mm-hmm.
usefulness to that force in
Mm-hmm.
life, but if it's out of hand, I mean, one of the things you need to do is to be able to be present with it as it's showing up. The individual has to be like, okay, I'm experiencing this. I'm not going to shut it off,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not totally identified with it. I need to be here with it and to believe that there's some good that can come from me being with it, not
Mm,
being perfectly identified from it, but not being dissociated from it either. And
mm,
that's a skill that evolves naturally in kinds of meditation practices and things like that, that
mm,
everybody should be working on to some degree. And obviously, not everybody will have a very developed capacity to do that. So,
mm.
what takes up the slack is usually the context, and the other people in that context can perform some of that role for us. If we can't necessarily be present with it ourselves, then hopefully we've cultivated intimate relationships in our lives where somebody else can be present to it for us or
Yeah.
with us, or situations in the world. And this gets to what we were talking about earlier. Wouldn't it
Mm,
be nice if
mm.
more spaces in the world were more ready to hold space for people as they went through those things, regardless of their own ability to be metacognitively aware?
Yes. I like that, and I think that's maybe that's you got to maybe that's a good closing in a way. I'll let you speak a little bit, but because I think that's maybe the inspiration for this project is going like, if you have an education system, or if you have something that is doing that for people, for like scaffolding, bringing that, then the teachers don't have necessarily, the teachers of kindergarten don't have to have those capacities necessarily, because the scaffolding is there. And like if it's carefully brought into some different contexts that can hold people as they develop those capacities, because I am with you. It's of course I know I'm not naive of why we shied away, is like of menstrual cycle conversation, and like from the concrete to the subtle, it brings, there is reverberation, no, but from the concrete to the subtle is like there is the mess, you can have the blood, actually the blood mess, but you have the mess of the emotions. So you have all sorts of things that are hard for us to, and the grief and the pain and all these little micro gems that the cycle offers for us to inhabit, and like as spiritual teaching. But they're difficult ones. They're ones that we've shied away as society. So of course it makes sense that we, like the metacognitive capacities and all that, the stuff that you were talking about, would allow us to do it like more gracefully, in a way that, because I'm wanting to include men in it, and then if we're wanting to include men in this conversation, not just be a red tent conversation, then maybe we do need to work on the bank together. Maybe that's what we're doing, like finding the modes of conversation, or like you're giving me more words for how this conversation could happen that's not off-putting. It can be generative, it can be hopefully insightful, and yeah.
Yeah, this has been terrific. I mean, I've got to go join the family for dinner in a minute, but this feels very productive and very refreshing to me to have conversations like this. And there's a lot more to be said.
Mm,
I wish you all luck with this project. And if we want this to be part one of a discussion that we continue later, I'd be very happy to do that as well.
yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I'd love that. So thank you. It was beautiful to start with you. I'll see you
Thanks.
soon.